This session is brought to you by Campbell Rinker. For nearly 30 years, Campbell Rinker has researched the opinions, attitudes, and motivational habits of nonprofit donors, including their perceptions of library philanthropy for the 2020 International Public Library Fundraising Conference. To read recent survey insights or learn more about how Campbell Rinker can serve you, visit campbellrinker.com.
Hello and welcome to Mapping Your Capital Campaign During Crisis, Campaign Planning and Management Strategies Amid COVID-19. I'm your moderator, Christina McPhillips, and I'm pleased to introduce three wonderful speakers today. First, Kevin Wallace, who is president of CampaignCouncil.org, a nationwide consulting group that assists nonprofits to plan and manage capital campaigns. For more than 17 years, Kevin and his team have helped over 80 nonprofits reach their capital goals, including several transformative library campaigns. Next, Carlyn Runnels, who is a fundraising consultant based in Missoula, Montana. During her 10 years fundraising, she has focused on annual and major giving and now capital campaigns. She's worked with Kevin at CampaignCouncil.org for 3 years. And finally, Leslie Modrow, who was hired as the first director of the Billings Library in 2006 with the responsibility for the day-to-day operations of the foundation and reports to a board of directors. In 2011, the Billings Library Foundation successfully raised over $5 million for the construction of the new Billings Public Library. Leslie was the president of the AFP Montana chapter and currently sits on the board of the Montana Nonprofit Association. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Leslie.
Thanks, Christina, and thank you all for joining us today. We are really excited to be here. As Christina said, I'm Leslie Modrow. I'm the director of the Billings Public Library Foundation. And a fun fact about me is I'm a sports junkie and I'm really sad about baseball not being played. It's just not summer without baseball. And then the second thing is that I like to cook. And so I've kind of been enjoying this time at home to be able to perfect my cooking skills. With that, I'm sending it over to Kevin.
Leslie, Christina said, Wallace, president of CampaignCouncil.org. And in fact, I was first introduced to LAC in 2011 when we actually had the honor of managing their, we did a feasibility study on their capital campaign. And every time we go to Billings and we see that gorgeous library sitting just on the north side of downtown, it fills us up with pride and the good work that we get to do with libraries around the nation. Fun fact about me, I've got 5 children. My wife and I are very, very blessed that way. And our youngest, who just graduated from school, had her graduation actually in a golf cart parade going around our neighborhood. So kind of a weird thing. Hope we never have to go through that again. Hope none of us have to go through that again with the COVID outbreak. And really, that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about today. And I'm going to hand it over to Carlyn, who's going to jump into our presentation.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Carlyn Runnels. I'm a consultant with CampaignCouncil.org. I live here in Missoula, Montana, and it's gorgeous here. And fun fact about me is I have a 20-year-old cat who is named Otto, and he loves to photobomb during these kinds of presentations. So you just may get to meet him today, but we will see. So today we're really excited to share how you can plan and manage your capital campaign during COVID-19. Before you can make a plan to know where you need to go, you first need to evaluate where you are now. So let's say you're on a road trip with a planned route to get to your destination, but there's a huge construction project that is disrupting your best laid plans. And maybe that construction project goes by the name COVID-19. So you can still get to your fundraising destination, but you need to reevaluate. So in order to address how you can get to your destination, you first need to figure out where you are and make alternative plans with a strong strategy to get there. So let's say that you're in or considering a feasibility study, and we'll put you on the map here with me in Missoula, Montana. If you're currently in or considering entering into a feasibility study, then that's where you are with me. Let's do a quick overview on feasibility studies. This is the step you take prior to launching a capital campaign. During feasibility studies, you're assessing your community's willingness to support your nonprofit during a capital campaign. We often say, if you want money, ask for advice, and if you want advice, ask for money. So right now, we would be working on the advice phase of this campaign planning, which is also known as the feasibility study. So if you're in or considering entering into a feasibility study and you're asking your peers, you're likely finding that the majority of these are on hold for the moment. That's the trajectory that we're seeing with our clients and hearing from other nonprofits as well. The biggest reason that nonprofits aren't pursuing feasibility studies at the moment is the fear of the unknown. None of us know how this pandemic will continue to play out or what the long-term impacts are going to be. So it may require you to consider some additional components of your capital campaign that weren't previously necessary. When you're thinking about your library capital campaign, you are probably thinking about putting in some new shelves, but maybe with the outcomes of this outbreak, you'd consider putting those shelves on casters so that they can move more easily to increase your event space if you need to ever have socially distanced events. Likewise, you may want to consider making a maker space that gives more room or more flexibility for adding additional stations that are further apart from each other. So having these kinds of considerations prior to launching your capital campaign could actually be really helpful. They could make the big difference in whether you're able to stay open or having to close during potential future outbreaks. So the fear of the unknown is prevalent in all of the fundraising efforts right now, but it's definitely impacting the willingness to pursue a feasibility study. Later, we're going to talk about how you can overcome this. But first, another thing that you could consider is the focus of your capital campaign. Now, I know we're all libraries here, but does your specific library focus more on the lifestyle services or the human services within your community? I know there's basic needs that are met through the libraries, but depending on where you fall for your capital campaign's efforts, consider which of these focuses you're in. Both of these matter right now, but the level of perceived importance and need is shifted in favor of those human service organizations. Leslie's going to address more about this next.
Thanks, Carlyn. So you've begun your journey of your capital campaign road trip. And in the roadmap symbolism, you have made it as far as Billings, Montana. Lucky you. It is beautiful here. The sun is shining. It's warm. It's wonderful. But back to work. The first piece for you to evaluate in your capital campaign phase is what part are you actually in? Because this will impact how you will move forward. If you're in the early phase of the campaign, say in your what we term family phase or the quiet phase, you may want to pause for the reasons that Carlyn was talking about in the feasibility study. There's just a lot of unknown right now, and with unknown comes fear. But you also need to pause to take a look at your campaign materials that you prepared during this phase. And you're most likely going to need to drastically address COVID-19 in these materials. So you're going to have to make some changes. Carlyn also mentioned that you'll want to consider the focus of your campaign on whether it's human services or whether it's lifestyle oriented. Now, we all know with libraries that we bridge that gap. And we have witnessed during this pandemic what we have already known, and that is the critical role libraries play in a community. Bringing forth that critical role in the human service part of our community will be the point that you will probably want to focus on during your capital campaign journey. So with that, I'm now going to turn it over to Kevin, and he will bring us up to date on that.
Thanks, Leslie. Next, we're going to look at our board's outlook. And to do that, we're going to come down way south in our map to sunny Tucson, Arizona. And while Leslie says it's beautiful out there in sunny Billings, you can see behind me just how bright it is. That's 108 degrees out there right now. So I am happy to be inside. I'm happy to be here with you discussing your board outlook. Now, there are two aspects. The first one we're going to look at is positive. Maybe your board has a positive outlook as to your organization's ability to go out there and fundraise. Hopefully what they're doing is they're saying, you know what, we are so important and there are so many things going on in this community that we can help with that we really should be out there engaging with the community. Now, these are your library trustees, your friends, your foundation board. Hopefully they're behind you and they're saying, you know what, we are willing and able to go out there and engage and steward our donors and move things forward. And this doesn't matter if you're in a feasibility study or in a capital campaign. We're hoping that your board is positive and behind you and pushing you forward. Now, of course, the other alternative to that is your board has a negative outlook. And what we mean by this is that they're holding back. And libraries are unique in that there's just not your foundation board, but there might also be a friends board. There might also be a library board or trustees of the library. And not all of them are fundraisers. Not all of them know exactly what it takes to go out there and engage. And they might have very specific fears about your ability and or your need to go out there and to engage. So maybe your library is exceptionally busy right now, and we're going to be referring back to a little bit what's happening in Billings. Leslie and the library, so the foundational library, they're doing some great things right there right now, and part of it is daycare for the community. So that staff is very busy, and in some instances, other staffs and other libraries are very busy too. So maybe the board's saying, wait, hold back. We need to let the staff do their job and not engage in fundraising. It also just might be that people are scared about engaging because they think it's insensitive. They think that, you know what, we should not be out there messing around with fundraising right now. Now, that is not the case. There is a lot of very, very productive fundraising going on around the nation within libraries and also within other sorts of nonprofits as well. So the reality is you should be engaging, and hopefully your board has a more positive outlook than negative outlook on these things, and that you can continue moving forward. So we're going to hand it back over to Leslie right now. She's going to move us across the map again as we discuss cases for support.
Okay, with that, let's take another look at our map. And we are going to continue our journey and make the big cross across the Rocky Mountains and go to the other side of the United States to our friends in White Plains, New York, and Carl Bloom and Associates. And at this point, we're going to look at our case for support. And we're going to have to really look at it closely using the COVID-19 lens. So before you can continue any fundraising, take time to pull out that case for support and make sure that it is addressing the impact COVID-19 has had on our library, on your library system. Your case must address your need for fundraising support, especially now from the fallout of the pandemic, by highlighting how their gifts will have future positive impact on your community if your goals are met. Also, we have to realize that there could be possibly some tax revenue shortfalls that libraries will have to contend with in the coming months. Discuss this impact with your library administration so that all of you, foundation, fundraisers, library, are all on the same page of meeting critical needs of the library. We know that once our libraries reopen, we are going to be stronger and more resilient than ever. But in the meantime, please make sure that you understand where everyone is coming from, and keep your donors, particularly the ones that have stayed with you and have made pledges or have supported the library. They're aware of what is going on, so they're not reading about it in the newspaper or hearing about it on the news. Communication will be the key element of keeping that case for support strong and relevant. Okay, now that we've taken a look at where we currently are, let's have Carlyn show us where we are soon going to be on the map.
That's right. Well, we all, of course, know where we would want to go, Austin, Texas, for the International Public Library Fundraising Conference. But since we can't actually be there, we'll use Austin as our ideal destination as we continue to map how you can strategically get to your capital campaign's success during this crisis. So before we can get officially back on the road, we need to consider some possible roadblocks that may come across your path along the way. First is the need for capital. Next is the internal relevance of your fundraising as perceived by your staff and board, and the external relevance of your campaign in the community. The final roadblocks are the fear and uncertainty of fundraising's future. But don't worry, once we cover these roadblocks, we'll talk about how you can avoid them to have a successful campaign. So now Kevin's going to tell us about the first roadblock.
The first roadblock is, what is your actual need for capital? What is your immediate need for capital? And sometimes we're looking at this, of course, during feasibility studies, and or when we have to shift focus a little bit, we're also looking at it in capital campaigns. We need to look at this from two different perspectives. There's, of course, your perspective, the library perspective, and then there's also the community perspective, and both of those are equally important. For any of you who have worked with us in the past and or heard us talk, it's always about how do we align the needs of your library with what meeting those needs are going to benefit the community. So here we are, we're looking at what is the actual need for capital. Now, there are two potential needs in this environment, one of them being overhead. So this is just kind of your general operating revenue, and or in some instances, you are now experiencing different type of overhead or an increase in overhead. And let's go back to this example that we have with the Billings Public Library. They're now doing daycare. And are they meeting all of those needs? Do they have enough funds set aside within the foundation to pay that staff? Do they have to hire additional staff? All of those are very important questions, and they need to be addressed right now as we're getting through this roadblock. And then the other one is, if it's not overhead, it's these capital improvements that we're looking at in capital campaigns. Are we going to have to shift our focus a little bit because of COVID-19? What is happening in our community now? For example, right now we've got one project where a lot of the improvements are to help the library become ADA compliant. But as Carlyn was pointing out earlier, there might be changes that the library needs to implement, such as the social distancing, such as moving your shelves around, such as creating bigger maker spaces that you need to address now in your capital. So whether it be overhead or improvement, you identify these basic needs and you decide how to go out there and focus this with your donor population in order to begin your re-engagement. So immediate needs, whether they be overhead or capital, also need to align with your mission. Now, there is a caveat to this, and let's go back over to Billings. And daycare is not within the mission of the Billings Public Library. However, we're in a pandemic. The city came to them and said, hey, we desperately need your help. So the library stepped up and said, okay, we can do this. So yes, in that instance, that becomes a need that you can actually raise money for during the pandemic, even though it's not directly aligned with your mission. But hopefully, what you're focusing on, whether it be overhead or capital expansion improvements, they align with your short and long-term mission. They're not having that mission creep where all of a sudden you're going over into left field and everyone's like, well, wait a minute, you're a library. Why are you doing that? So make sure that it aligns with your mission, that you have identified actually what type of capital you're going to be raising and the immediacy of that, because right now everything's about we've got to go out there and raise money for this specific reason. So with that said, we're going to go back over to Leslie and she's going to introduce us to a couple more roadblocks.
Thanks, Kevin. Okay, so your next two roadblocks address the relevance of the library and its fundraising priorities. First, you may encounter some internal roadblocks from your own leadership team and your board. While it's ideal to have their support, there are some very real feelings that fundraising right now is a sensitive issue, and we shouldn't be going out and approaching people right now. Of course, we know that fundraising right now must happen. If the need was important before the pandemic, it's even more important now. So take some time to consider how you can help your board understand that moving forward with the fundraising strategy isn't insensitive or tone deaf. In fact, avoiding fundraising is even more tone deaf. So you may be the only one on the one-way road to fundraising, but you can help others join you. Share stories that you're hearing from your donors with your board. Your donors love the library. They want to help you. They will share with you how much they are missing the library or how they're seeing others miss the library. And by sharing those stories with your board, they too will see that fundraising is the critical thing that we need to be doing. Secondly, you also need to consider the external relevance of your library, both pre and post-COVID. Questions to consider are, how were you able to serve your community while the doors were closed, if at all? Another question is, what's your history as a fundraising organization within the community? Are you well established, or are you fairly new? Or do people realize that the library has a foundation and that you're raising money for them? The other question would be looking beyond your library and how COVID-19 has actually impacted your community or your state as a whole. Are you more in a situation that's closer to what New York City has gone through, which was very scary and continues to be scary? Or are you on kind of the opposite end of the spectrum in a Montana situation where we've had less than 500 cases at this point for the entire state? These are again, things that you need to put through the COVID lens. This blind corner road sign is a great fit here because you can't go into this period of fundraising blindly. You need to assess the situation from all sides to know the relevance of your library within a COVID context of your community right now. Okay, so we're going to be showing a clip of a 30-second vignette that My Library Foundation put together, and we produced this and is now running on CBS affiliates across the state of Montana. And we did this so that people could see, even though the doors were closed to the public, the library was still open in another way. And to give you background, Kevin's kind of been telling you about this situation that happened at the Billings Public Library. The governor at the beginning of March declared the shelter in place and everything had to close. And at the same day, this was on a Friday, the schools announced that they were also closing. So on Saturday, the hospitals were scrambling because the healthcare workers had no place to take their children. And they needed those healthcare workers at the hospitals. So on Sunday morning, the idea came up to use the library as a possible place. The two hospital administrators met with the mayor, they met with the city manager, they brought in the attorneys, they brought in the library director, and all of the detail was put together. By Sunday night, a cleaning crew came in, they cleaned the library, and at 6 o'clock Monday morning, our first kiddo was greeted at the door. And since that time, the library has been the child care center for our healthcare workers, which has been really a great experience for the hospital and for the library, but also for the families, because the hospitals are only a couple of blocks from the library, so it was easy. And those kiddos got to see the library first up close and personal, and it's all been good. So we'll show the video.
Because of the current crisis, the Montana state government took action to prevent transmission of COVID-19 by issuing a shelter-at-home order, which resulted in the temporary closure of the Billings Public Library. The library took this challenge to create new innovative ways to serve our patrons and help our city in this uncertain time. As we move forward into a new phase of normal, it will be the library's honor to accept the challenge of serving our communities in evolved, safe ways.
Okay, so now I'm going to turn it over to Carlyn.
Thanks, Leslie. That was such a great video. You guys did a great job there. Just as we're afraid of the possibility of falling rocks, many also fear what the future of fundraising holds. While none of us knows, the good news is that people have adapted to different communication methods during this time. We'll talk more about that in a little bit, but the reality is that people may be afraid to meet face-to-face for quite some time, especially if your donors are at a more at-risk age group. Making these asks virtually will be a challenge, but closing those gifts virtually is certainly going to be much more complicated. Since the donor will have to complete and send their paperwork in after your virtual meetings, rather than in person like we like to do during those in-person meetings, you'll find new ways to make sure that you're effectively closing your gifts. Fundraising events may also be never the same again, so many nonprofits do rely heavily on those for their income. So these uncertain times will continue to hit nonprofits down the road. So now that we've addressed these possible roadblocks, it's time to make our plan to get back on the road and make your roadmap to fundraising success. So now Kevin's going to tell us about our first step.
Step number one in getting back on the road and being successful is that we need to be flexible. And what we're seeing time and time again, so our company at any one time is handling 3, 4, 5, 6 campaigns, and when COVID hit, everything kind of went upside down, and just we as a team, we all of a sudden have to start maneuvering in different ways and seeing how we can either keep feasibility studies moving forward or successfully put them on hold, or even more challenging, how do we start working in a virtual world within capital campaigns and or make the tweaks that might be necessary to those. So there have been a whole lot of problems that have been going on, and we want your campaign goals and timelines to extend based on that. So what we're suggesting that you do is, if you've got a timeline for a feasibility study that's 4 or 5 or 6 months, just go ahead and kick it out a little bit further by a month or two. And the problem with the feasibility studies that we're seeing is that we have a way of engaging virtually, which is great, but sometimes the people that we want to talk with aren't comfortable doing so, and they certainly aren't comfortable doing one-on-one meetings. So it's just taking a little bit longer for folks to hit a comfort level with all of that. And then on the campaign side, the timelines are stretching out for the same reasons. It's just harder to get in touch with people. Everyone's kind of backing off a little bit and kind of wanting to see where things go. Now, that does not by any stretch mean that folks aren't giving. They are giving. It's just taking a little bit more time to get there. The second thing that we need to be flexible with is with our construction costs and timelines. Now, we are seeing that while the early phases of construction, where you're pouring your foundation or you're putting up your stud walls, that's still going along fine. And the reason is that those production materials have still been readily available. However, we've got a library client out in Missoula, Montana, and they've been building their library now for probably over a year. But they're at that point to where they're waiting for fixtures and furnishings, and all of that has been very specialized. Those manufacturing facilities have actually been closed some time. They're probably coming back online right now, but the Missoula Public Library has seen a fairly good delay in their construction and or when their ribbon cutting ceremony is going to be able to happen because of COVID-19. So we also need to be flexible with our construction. The third one is loans. And actually, this is kind of a positive for us right now, because those of you that have been out there looking at bridge loans or just loans for different reasons, you're seeing that interest rates are coming way down. And so that's going to make your money a little bit cheaper to borrow and or to bridge for your construction projects. I urge you to keep an eye out all of the time, and maybe some of you on your boards of directors, you've got bankers, you've got financial experts, you've got CPA people. Stay in touch with them and find out what, either at the federal level or the state level or even the local level, what sort of funding opportunities are becoming available. Because as we all know, through the SBA and through other lending mechanisms, the federal government wants things to keep moving, wants the economy to keep moving. So there are opportunities opening up all the time. Now, number 4, what do we need to be flexible with? And Carlyn has already touched on this a little bit. It's our feasibility study methods. And what I mean by that is, how are we engaging and communicating with people during these? Now, typically, we were always doing things face to face, and we were always sitting across the table from somebody and saying, hey, glad to meet you. Tell me, Carla spoke about this earlier on when we first opened up. Give me your advice about this project. Let me hear about what you feel about this potential to move into a capital campaign. So now we're moving to these video platforms. We're also we've always done some interviews on the telephone, but that's kind of like your third option. So personal meetings, they're starting to happen a little bit, but you've got to be very conscious about the other folks that you're interviewing with, and they may not want to do it. And quite frankly, in some of your states and or in Canada, it might not even be feasible to doing it at all if you're still shut down. So this platform works very well. We're having a lot of success with it. Practice it though, and get fluent in it. Make sure that you're comfortable with your camera. Make sure you're comfortable with not making a lot of noise on your keyboard when you're talking with them. And like Carlyn is doing here, and sharing the study book and or the ideas of your project with the people that you're talking to. So make sure that we stay nimble during these times. We want to keep momentum moving forward. We want to keep moving. We want to identify, though, these roadblocks as we've been showing you, adjust to them, and then keep things going. So we're going to go on over to Leslie right now, and Leslie's going to talk to us more about how we adapt our materials.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. The next step in your successful fundraising plan has to deal with looking at all of your campaign materials. You cannot proceed with approaching or talking to donors until you've had a chance to update all of them, meaning your brochure, your case for support. Obviously, the case for support is the most important, but your brochure, your website, your appeals, your video, all need to have that COVID-19 lens now as a major part of your materials. If you don't have that type of lens, if you sit down with a donor, you will appear uninformed, insensitive, and totally tone deaf, and that will put people off. So if possible, you want to acknowledge that this is going on and acknowledge the impact that it's having on your library, both negatively and positively. You may also want to address any successful fundraising for your organization will have long-term positive impact. Now, I am going to go send it back to Carlyn, who's going to talk about solicitation.
Thanks. So fundraising, again, like we used to, is going to feel like an impossible task. So make your time and your energy effective by segmenting and targeting your high capacity prospects by identifying them through wealth screening. Depending on which database you use, your database may have wealth screening built into it, but if not, there are lots of alternative options that are out there as well. So there's free resources like Zillow or FEC or SEC.gov or Donor Search that can give you some insight into real estate worth, political giving, stock values, past giving to other organizations, you name it. There's also some paid platforms out there too, like iWave or GiveEffect, or even just companies that will do one-off batch screenings of a certain number of records for you. I could honestly spend the rest of the time today talking about the different options that are available. So I encourage you to just think critically about what your budget and what your data needs actually are, and then choose from there. Either way, by using these screening tools, you'll see better success and you'll get back on the road to fundraising success even faster, because you're making the most of your efforts and you're being really strategic about who you are soliciting and for how much. Another component to consider is your current campaign phase. So if your campaign is in or approaching the end, or your public phase, you may want to consider alternatives with your smaller capacity donors. Perhaps you want to postpone your public phase or segment your prospects differently based on their giving capacity. You may also want to pivot entirely, letting your donor prospects know that your campaign is on hold until more immediate needs are met. So for instance, as Kevin and Leslie have both mentioned, maybe you need to pivot to fundraise for online children's programming rather than building a new space at this time. So along these same lines, people are also communicating in a different fashion during this COVID outbreak. So now that we've addressed how to target your prospects, let's talk about how you'll communicate with them. We mentioned this earlier, but there's been a wonderful spike in the way that people are engaging with technology during this pandemic. All age groups are engaging with technology at a much higher level because they must. It's how we are surviving socially during these crazy times that we live in. So why not use this to your advantage? You can live stream Facebook updates, send video thank yous to your prospects and donors, make a short video using an app like TikTok about why your library is awesome, host a virtual happy hour for your top prospects or potential donors on Zoom. You really have endless opportunities, and people are just frankly on their devices a lot more often now. So you're likely to reach a higher audience with these different communication channels. So just because COVID is hopefully ending soon doesn't mean that people are going to stop using these technologies that they've gotten accustomed to during this time because they've been relying on them. So now I'll show you another video example. This one was from the UN Refugee Agency, and this was originally a TikTok, but this clip is just showing that this TikTok is living on YouTube because of the way I was going to embed it in here. So it's just a very informative, brief piece that shows what they are doing at the UNHRC in this downtime with an ask at the end of the video. So let's take a look. Ooh, that Times Square footage gives me goosebumps every time. So now I'll turn it over to Kevin to talk about athletic listening.
Thanks, Carlyn. It's a great video and such a wonderful creative use of just getting your message out there and things that all of us can produce, probably not at that level, but relatively quickly and keep people engaged with us. Now, let's talk a little bit about athletic listening. First off, it's a really cool word. I wish we had coined it, but we didn't. Actually, Carlyn picked this up early on in COVID and listening to another company's webinar. And what it essentially means is that there is so much fear and uncertainty out there that while we as fundraisers are very accustomed to, we've got our agenda, we've got A, B, and C, we're going to go in there and we're going to engage and we're going to educate and we're going to cultivate. And then once we say this, then we're going to go do this, and then we're going to go make an ask and do all these cool things. And we can't do that anymore. We really need to sit back and actively engage with our donors empathetically and hear where they are and what they're thinking and what their current state of mind is. Regardless of their age, regardless of how long they've known you, any of those things, when you sit down and talk with them, the first thing that should be out of your mouth is, how are you doing? How has all this been impacting you? And how are you dealing with it? And in doing so, you're going to get to that listening empathetically part. So it's not enough just to say, how are you doing? But you need to wait and find out what their response is. And really take the time to judge where they are mentally and of course financially as well. But that's right now on the side. You want to find out how are they doing. That's going to be reflective of not just the individual, but as you're on your community as on a whole as well. So as a fundraiser, I'm guilty of this all the time. Whether it is a meeting with a board of directors or a capital campaign committee or an executive director or any number of different groups, I go in and I've got an agenda and I want to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I want to get through it. And then sometimes I want to go get on an airplane or get in a taxi, or, we're busy. Slow down. Coming back to flexibility. Take your time with them, listen, and if the agenda needs to change, please change it. So if we as consultants are going in and doing a feasibility study, we're doing this all the time right now. How are you doing? Tell me how the pandemic is impacting you. And every now and again, we'll run across a person that is just really at odds with everything that's happening in their lives. And we know this is not the right time to talk to them. They're not going to give us good advice. They don't want to be there with us. They were just doing it out of generosity. Put it off. Same thing if your goal is to go in and make an ask of somebody. Go in, ask them how are they doing, be athletic with that listening. Just don't let the answer wash through you. Engage with it, put yourself in their shoes, understand where they're coming from, empathize where they're coming from. And if you can't make an ask, if your gut is saying, you know what, now's not a good time for me to be doing this, then don't do it. You can always come back and address it later on. So with this athletic listening technique that we're imploring everyone to use, and probably as fundraisers, not probably, we should definitely be doing it all the time, but with a heightened level of sensitivity right now, because so many people genuinely are fearful and have so much uncertainty in your lives, make sure you begin every meeting with athletic listening and being prepared to back off of whatever's on your agenda based on how that person's mental state of mind is at that point. So with that said, I'm going to hand it over to Carlyn, and she's going to help us wrap this up.
Thank you. So there we have it, the roadmap to successfully planning and managing a capital campaign during crisis. We've discussed the importance of evaluating where you've been in order to know where you need to go. Are you in or considering a feasibility study? Are you in a capital campaign? And if so, which phase are you in? What's the mental state of your board right now? Do they have a positive or a negative outlook on the way fundraising is going at this point? We also considered the possible roadblocks and how you can overcome them, then laid out the plans for getting you back on the road. So those roadblocks included the need for capital, the internal relevance and external relevance of your campaign within the community, and the fear and uncertainty of fundraising's future. But like I said, we made a plan for how you can get back on the road. And that includes being flexible, updating your materials, assessing your screening and your data health and wealth, and then soliciting strategically, creatively communicating, and listening athletically. So with that, I'll turn it back to Kevin, who's going to wrap it up.
Thanks, Carlyn. And thank you all for attending our webinar, and we'll open it up for questions.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and grab these 3 lovely speakers to answer some questions that you guys have posted. All right, I see Carlyn.
Hi.
Let's see, I got to grab just Leslie really quickly. And hopefully Kevin, there's Kevin. And let me grab Leslie. Okay, we do have a couple of questions queued up already. So we're gonna go through. And thank you guys so much. I know I already said it, but thank you so much for joining us today and for doing everything for this presentation. I know that it's a very strange time. So it's certainly helpful to see kind of how you guys are recommending the pivot for capital campaigns and kind of what is the most important and kind of ordering that for everybody. So thank you. Okay, I have 4 votes, Leslie. This is a really easy one. For if you'd be willing to share your current case for support in the documents area.
Oh,
Does it list already?
It's it's not there.
Okay.
we will get one for you.
Okay. Thank you very much. So everybody who asked for that, you'll see that at some point before the end of the conference, hopefully. Okay, here's another question for you all. Do you normally share the names of those interviewed in feasibility study with the Library Foundation?
That's a good question, Katie, and thank you for sharing it with us. Yes, we do. And our company has always looked at the feasibility study as kind of a discovery period for both us and also for our clients. And it's imperative that the client know who's been interviewed, and to a certain level, what have they actually said they like and or dislike about the project. And in fact, if they've disclosed a gift to us, to share that with them as well. It's, what is a feasibility study if you're not actually telling the person exactly what was said and exactly which people are indicating a proficiency to give to your organization. So yeah, we share all that information.
Okay.
We do as a company, but that does change from company to company. It just depends on what their preference is, but we personally do.
Okay. And then we've got a question from Jonna Ward. We have 3 Carnegies out of a system of 27 locations that need retrofitting. We have some public funds, but could need several million. How would you approach this? Ooh.
Jonna, that is a great question, and thank you for asking us. And we've actually done some Carnegies in the past, and there's such a great legacy to not only that individual and to philanthropy across the country and internationally, but they're also, quite frankly, they're landmarks in different cities because of the architecture and the heritage of them all. And when you've got different sites, what we typically do is we go in and we'll look at, you're a sophisticated library, you've probably got your donors segmented out by who's visiting what branch, and then speaking to each of them about their interest in doing a capital project, whether it be specifically just for that library. And actually, we're doing this right now with a client out in Phoenix that it's not a library, but they're metro wide, and we looked at 12 facilities, and right now we're helping them decide, are they going to do just an individual campaign for about the 4 areas that need improvement, or are they going to be doing a citywide campaign to improve all of them? So our process is what it did for that client was, it's saying, all right, here's how much money we need to raise, here's the projects that we need to raise it for, and here are our recommendations with regard to, do we do these campaigns individually or do we do them all together, because everyone just wants all of the, in your instance, all of the Carnegies to thrive. So a lot of meetings, a lot of advice, and as we were just saying in our video, a lot of athletic listening about what people are into right now.
Yeah, that was a fun way of talking about it, the athletic listening.
I wish we had come up with that phrase. It's a good one.
Hey, no one will ever know. Leslie, I think this one's for you. Could you talk a little bit more about the library lifestyle focus, or if that might be altered due to the virus?
So everyone jump in, Kevin and Carlyn, please jump in. I think at certain points we might, when we're doing campaigns, we look at either a building or we're looking at programming. And sometimes you have to get back to the roots of why you're even needing a new building. Is it because of the building has outgrown its space? And if that's the case, then that's the sort of message you want to bring back. You don't want to talk about, oh gosh, this building is falling apart. You want to talk about, there's so many children coming into this building. And now that with COVID, so many parents are homeschooling their children or having to look for resources, and we are here to help them, and we need your help to make that all possible. So bridging both, but really getting back to that fundamental use of, we need it for the people.
I can add on to that a little bit too, Leslie. Thank you for that, because we're seeing kind of across the board with specifically with libraries, there is a need for you all to start to incorporate more of the community-wide services. Libraries, I've got on this, and I was listening to Dirk Rinker's presentation earlier in the week about just how popular libraries are. What did he say? Like 2/3 of the people see libraries and as positive entities in their community. And those are fantastic numbers. And they want to see you actually collaborate throughout the community and working with all sorts of, whether it be other nonprofits or other government organizations, so that libraries become more of these community gathering areas and people can get a lot done. Now, that said, when you're looking at a feasibility study or what are we going to actually be raising money for, right now a lot of it is programmatic, because as Leslie said, they're now essentially serving as a daycare center, and they're probably having to kind of refocus a little bit of their fundraising efforts on keeping that going, and or just capitalizing on the fact that the city sees this as a great benefit, specifically the healthcare providers. And Leslie and her foundation have an opportunity to go out there and say, you know what, this is the service that we're providing. We hope that you would give to us based on this unique service that we stepped up and jumped into for the community.
Great. Okay, we have time for a couple more questions. I see one here, another about a feasibility study. Okay, this is from Jill Lynn, and she says, we had a feasibility study for a capital campaign done last summer and are going into a campaign next year. Since the study will be 2 years old by the time we start the campaign, will it still be relevant?
Yeah, my short answer to that, Lee, is no. So much has changed. When we do feasibility studies, and oftentimes what happens is there's a change in leadership, or there's just the foundation isn't really ready to jump into it yet, and they postpone and they postpone and they postpone. And you might not need a full-scale feasibility study. What you probably need, and this kind of dovetails nicely back into what was asked earlier about, do you share the names of the people that you spoke with? So if your consultant gave you a list, as I hope he or she or they did, of saying, here's the people that we interviewed, here's what they said, and those self-disclosed gift amounts are right here. Got those top probably 5 to 10, which are going to really make your campaign successful or not successful, and go back and engage with them again. So whereas your first feasibility study might have lasted 2 or 3 or 4 months, depending on how many people were interviewed, your follow-up feasibility study should not take that much time at all. You just want to go back and check in with your major gift prospects and find out if they're still on board with your dream of moving forward.
Awesome. Okay, looks like we got another one in. This one's for Leslie. Leslie, did you utilize naming opportunities for items for the Billings Library?
Yes, that was a big deal. And actually, we're still using those naming opportunities. So that's still a viable opportunity for us. I will say, work closely with your city, with your library rules, and make sure that those naming opportunities meet all the legal definitions that the city has laid out. And especially if you're having to do bonding for the library, you need to make sure that the laws are all followed for that issue as well. As long as there's guidelines, there's written guidelines, the city has agreed with it, the library directors have agreed with it, your foundation board is all aware with it, then yes, use them. But definitely have your guidelines in place beforehand.
Awesome.
One more quick thing about that, Katie, before you.
Please.
Oh, go ahead, Carlyn.
No, I was just going to ask Leslie off the top of her head if you remember what your campaign goal was and then what your highest naming opportunity was. I think that's helpful to see. If you don't remember, I know it's been a couple of years.
There was, I think the largest one we received, well, we received a large gift that donor wanted to remain anonymous, and they did not want their name on anything. They just believed in the city and believed in the library and believed that the library was the cornerstone of a strong community. So they did not want their name on anything. The largest naming opportunity we had was $750,000.
Wow.
And from one family.
And I don't know, Leslie, if that was for that just a quick story about when I was working with Leslie, and one of her donors came up to her and said, I want to make a big gift, but I want to make a fountain in the library.
And I don't know how many days out of the week Leslie might actually curse that fountain because somebody's throwing money into it, or their kid who's trying to wade through it, but it's one of those things is a consultant, you're like, you want to reconsider that, because in the long term, anyway, sometimes donors come up with crazy ideas that aren't even on your naming opportunity list, but they have a vision. And Leslie was kind enough to go forward with that vision, and now she's got a perhaps problematic but really cool looking fountain in her library.
It's right by the children's area, and it's beautiful. It is a lovely, lovely feature that puts out a very soft sound throughout the building, and it truly is enjoyed by all. So it's a gift. It truly was a gift.
Well, Leslie, we have one more question for you that kind of follows up on the naming opportunities, and it was, how did you promote them?
Oh, okay. So when we were meeting with donors,
go ahead.
We would sit down, we'd go through the case for support, and then we would say, if you're interested, if there's a story about the library that touched you deeply, if there was some part of the library that was important to you, here are some opportunities to leave a lasting legacy. And that's the way we just incorporated it as part of our ask. And it was part of the package that when we would sit down and talk to them, the naming opportunities were listed in that campaign ask.
Okay, awesome. Well, I want to thank you all three of you so much again for joining us today and for presenting, and that live Q&A was super helpful. I'm sure everybody thought so. Thank you again, Kevin, Carlyn, and Leslie, for your time.
Thank you.
Have a
Enjoy
good
the rest of the conference. Bye.
Everybody.
Bye.